Spade back here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today I'm going to start a new project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a cross carry uh, with a sling, large handgun holster. And what I'm going to do it for is this new Rossi Brawler. It is a 45 Colt 410 shotgun shell. So it'll shoot either one of them. And this is a great platform to carry out in the woods when I'm on my four-wheeler or the tractor, whatever it is, while I'm out and about in the woods. So that's not something, obviously, I want to carry on my hip, way too large. So I want to develop and create a holster that goes cross, kind of a crossbody with a sling on it. So all I got to do is throw it over my head and my shoulder, my arm, and I can carry that around with me wherever I go and it not be pulling on my side or my hip. So that's what we're going to start today. It'll probably be a multi-part series, so stick with it if you're interested. I hope you do. So come on in and let's get started. All right, so since I've never done anything on this scale, what I want to do is start out with a new pattern. I do want to secure it with a flap and a snap. So I'm going to start with making a pattern for it. I want to have plenty of room down here at the end of the barrel. I'm going to leave about an inch or so just to make sure I've got plenty of room. And then I want to make sure I have plenty of poster board here for my pattern as I fold it over. I've got a big full piece. I think it's 20 by 26, so it should be plenty big enough. So I'll fold that over to make sure I've got enough before I start drawing on it. Then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start here just below the hammer. And this does have a sight rail, but I'm not planning on putting any sights on it anytime soon, even if I do, but I'm not going to include this to be big enough for that. So I'll take my pencil, I'll just kind of draw me a quick little light line from just below the hammer all the way down around the sight and to the tip of the barrel. Now, I'm just kind of using that as a reference line. So as I turn this up on its top, then I can go ahead and mark the center at each end. I'll carefully roll that over to the other side, trying not to let it move there. And that'll kind of give me an idea of how wide that's going to be. Now, obviously, it's going to have to be a little bit wider than that. I'm just giving me a reference point there. So I'll flip it back over, put it back where it was when I started on my light reference line there. Then I'll do this side. So the same idea. I'm going to lightly come down and make a light reference mark around here to where it just starts to bend right here on the trigger guard. That's where I'm going to stop. So I've got my reference lines up to where I want to stop here and where I want to stop here on this side. So I can, depending on the design that I want to make, I can probably go on up just a hair. I don't want to cover, I'll go to the middle of the trigger guard. I don't want to cover my grip so I can get it out of there easy enough. Then I'm going to start from about right where the end of that sight mount is. Now I can kind of start getting my design down to what I want it to look like. So I'll visualize that. Do I want it to come up like this, or maybe now this is just a rough sketch because I'm still going to have to figure out my lines and how much room I'm going to need when I cut my leather out to stitch it. So these are all rough sketch lines. So I can kind of take a look at that. Then what I want to do, that looks good. I'll get this out of the way. Now, remember, these are my rough lines. Now I can start figuring out where I want this and what I want it to look like. As I sketch this down, leaving plenty of room down here for the brawler. Now, I'm going to do the same thing on this side, but before I do that, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to look and see. This is right at 1.5 inches wide at its widest point. So when that folds over, I'm going to need 1.5 inches at least from the center marks that I made. So that's where I'm going to start. I'll do 1.5 inches on each side, and that gives me approximately 3 inches when I fold that over. Now I can kind of take a look at that and see what that looks like on my pattern. And I can look under there. That looks like that's going to be plenty of space for my fold or for the actual backbone of the holster. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. Just as, again, as a reference line. I haven't done anything. I actually haven't completed any finalized lines on my pattern at all yet. So far, I've got all my reference lines And that's how I started. Then what I've got to do is I've got to figure out how much leather I'm going to need when I fold this over left around my sketch lines to actually do my stitching. So I can fold this over. It's somewhat pliable. And what I can do is I could take scribe. That one a little too pointed. And I can scribe me just a little mark on my poster board so that I know how far out I need to go. So what I can do is flip that over now. And that also followed that contour. I can take my knife and I can cut bigger than that if I want to, so that I can trim it down to the size that I want. So there's that side, and I can go ahead and cut that off. I don't need that piece right there for anything, so I can get that out of my way. Now what I want to do is go ahead and scribe my fold line or my center line. Remember, I marked out 1.5 inches. I'll describe each one of those 1.5 inch lines. That'll give me a little bit easier process to fold. Lay that back on my outlines and my center mark. I can roll that on over. Take a look and see if I think that's going to be enough material. And I think we're in pretty good shape. So I will scribe right down the center, which were those reference marks I made at first. Fold my poster board over directly at those scribe marks. Take my pencil and follow that on this side. So that gives me my full piece that I'm going to need in order to cover this. Again, I can double check it, make sure. Remember, you can't add any material when you cut it, but you can take some out. You can cut more off. And this looks like it's going to be pretty good. So next thing I want to do is I want to set it up for my flap. Here's my top right here. I want to make sure I've got it set. Now I can go ahead and go from the center And I'll make it a little curve there at the end, give it a little bit of character. Instead of having this come way up here, I'll curve it down just a little bit. That's all preference where you want this to go. And then I can put my flap. Now my flap is going to be attached to the back part here, not the front. So I got to make sure I know which is back and which is front. So I mark those in case I use this pattern again. And this is where my flap's going to be. Now, my flap's got to be big enough to come over this on the front and snap and cover. So I need this back in here. Again, all my reference marks are still there so I can see exactly where this is going. So I'm going to go ahead and mark where this flap needs to go. And I'm just putting a little reference mark there. Then it needs to go at least to this point. And then the same way here, I'll make a little reference mark on the back. Now, I want this to be wide enough to cover this whole area of the grip and the handle. So I'm going to take a French curve, and while I have the brawler sitting there, it gives me an idea of how far up I want to go here. So I'll just draw some reference marks. And then the same way on this side. Just some light reference marks there, and let's see what we end up with. When we go to turn this over. Now I'm going to connect these two marks here. And that flattens that out a little bit. So as we come over the top, let's put just a little reference point in my poster board so I know where that's at. And as I come over the top, how close am I to where the side or the front comes over? So right now, I'm right at trigger guard. Right here is where the top of this comes to. I can fold this over, see where this goes, and it does go right below that. So this needs to be just a little bit larger, and I want it to be as wide as the actual holster, which it is right here. So it needs to be just a little bit longer. So I am going to change and just extend this French curve approximately 3/4 of an inch. And I'll finish that off again at this end. And let's double check it again. Again, this is a lot of measuring more than once to make sure I've got exactly what I want before I start cutting into any of my leather. Alright, so that looks like that's in pretty good shape. Now, this is going to want to, in other words, if I fold it straight over, right, it's going to want to stop right here. Now I can shift this whole thing over so that it comes more at an angle to here, and it may fit better, look better at an angle instead of coming down straight. So I could take this measurement and just angle it, and it ends up being approximately 6 inches. So I could do it across like this. And you could have started out that way. But I just kind of wanted to show, if you wanted to make it straight on, you could, or if you want to make it fold over at an angle. If we make it fold over at an angle, it's not going to need to be that deep. So it does make a difference of how deep it's going to be. We're going to go right at 9 inches from below the trigger guard, and let's see what that does for us as far as a flap. So we'll go 9 inches from the front edge of the trigger guard back to here, and then let's go ahead and draw those lines. Still going to keep it right at 6.5 inches, I think. And if we need to, we can tweak that, because we haven't drawn any cutting lines yet on our pattern material. So let me show you where we're at this point. Here's the top of the holster on the back. This is the front. And then here's where I drew the straight flap that would come over. But remember, it'd leave a lot of space over here by the hammer, because it would stop at the end of the grip. Here's where we drew the angled part that would come over, and let's see what that looks like. Again, a lot of trial and error. as straight on as I can. Find where that trigger guard is. And make me a reference hole. I'll circle that hole. Make sure I don't lose it on this side. And that gives me a really good idea where this point is and how much I'm going to need to get down and cover that. So it looks like I can go ahead and I'm going to come up. That should be plenty of length. So I'm going to go right at, looks like about 6 inches. So about 6 inches across. And let's go ahead and kind of get us another light mark here so that we can get 6 inches from that mark and make it fairly square. And then we can trim it from that as we need be. So I've got that mark. Now what I want to do is let's go ahead and let's do, I want to round that. So I'll use, you can use all different kinds of French curves to do that. I just kind of play around with them until I find the right one that I want, because I don't want a huge curve there. Then I'll measure up to see where I started that curve. It's 4.5 inches. Kind of get my reference on the other side there. And if I want to, I probably ought to mark that so I don't miss it at all. 1 3/4 down from my 6 inch. So I'll mark it 1 3/4. That way I know I've got it perfectly. And then make that reference to where they match. So now what I can do is I can go ahead and cut this flap. Probably should go ahead and do my lines first. So the first lines I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this where I marked this. I want to bring this flap on down here to where that's going to stop on the back of the holster. Then the flap will come over. I want to make sure that flap is going to come over and hit on the holster, which it looks like it's going to be fine. Then I can I always take a Sharpie or a pen afterwards, and once I get all of my sketched in lines and I'm comfortable with them, I'll go ahead and take a pen or Sharpie and I'll outline the lines that I'm actually going to cut for my pattern. I know it seems like it takes forever to get here, but again, if you want to save leather and not make any mistakes when you get to that point, it's much easier and cheaper to do your all of your measuring and remeasuring and everything during the pattern process. All right, so there's that side, and there's the flap. You can see it now. It's right here. And then what I need to do is cut this, fold that over so that I know where to mark my other side. So I can go ahead and cut that portion of the pattern out. That part is complete. So I can get rid of all that. All this is just scrap. I'll try to keep as much of it as possible I can use on smaller projects and set it aside. Now over here, I need to figure out exactly where this is going to fold and know where this is going to cut. So I've got a reference mark there on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over on that center mark, and I am going to mark, I'm going to hold that down, and I'm going to mark these reference points for cutting the front side, because the front side's the one that's actually going to have the curvature on it. So again, I can use French curves if I want, and if I used one here, and I'm just trying to give it a little bit of design quality here. Alright, so I've gone ahead and got my curve here on this side, and then I can go ahead and try to get me a little bit of under curve here. And I'm coming down to match this side. Now I can fold that over and take a look and see, and it's right on. It matches right up. So what I can do is finish up my Sharpie to do my finish marks. And what this does too is it keeps me from making a mistake on my cuts when I go over that. So I don't cut on the wrong line, because I get so many sketch lines in there as I'm sketching this out. So I'm going to do the same thing here, where this flat part comes back into the holster. I want to make sure that it's not just cut off in a square. I'm trying to get right about on that center mark. And come around that corner. And I'll show you what I'm talking about as soon as I make this curve. So right here where the flap comes into the front, I curved that around instead of just making that a straight cut or 90 degree. So that it kind of flows into that flap. Now I can go ahead, double check it before I cut it out. Then I can go ahead and cut the rest of this out. The nice thing too about that Sharpie is that it does give you a nice, brilliant black, that where it really stands out on that white poster board, where you know exactly where to cut. It's a thick enough line that as long as you stay on the actual Sharpie mark, it's definitely going to be close enough for the leather pattern. I'll come up and go around that mark, and I can get rid of this, so I can put that away, use it at a later time. Now there's my actual pattern. So I've got my front, my back, and my flap. Now that I can actually fold all this, let's go ahead and put the brawler back in there. And let's come over here and let's see how we're doing as far as material. Should be plenty of material there. Now let's check the flap and where it's going to snap. So that gives you a real good idea of what that's going to look like. Just how much, just a little bit of the grip sticks out. But everything's nice and covered. It'll snap right in this area, right in the center of the flap. And I can take some of this flap out right here if I want, so that it's not so large. So we can do that at this point, where I think on this side it looks pretty good. On this side we can actually come down. I don't want to take too much out. I want it to still cover up most of, or all of, the holster on the top. So this is what I was talking about. You know, you can make changes now. And all it is basically time, instead of trying to make changes once you get to the leather portion of it, and then you could be wasting leather, which is expensive, and also time. So let's go ahead and cut this where I just made that sketch, and let's see what that does to the shape of that flap. And I think it'll clean it up, because I don't need all that excess leather on that flap. So there's what it looks like after it's cut. Let's see how it fits. Much better. So now, instead of it hanging out here, now we've got a nice clean flap that's going to cover everything except for right here. And we could have covered that too. We'll see what it looks like once we get our leather cut out. But we could have covered that too. We could have brought this out wider here, but I think that looks good. So there's our pattern for our Rossi Brawler. All right, so we've got that portion of this project done. There's the pattern. There's the flap. There's the rest of the holster pattern. We've got the front, we've got the back, and the flap. Basically, it's three pieces in one, but it's all one piece. The only place we're going to have to stitch is right down here where that folds over. I appreciate you coming along and checking it out. Come back next week and you'll see the second part of the Brawler cross draw, cross carry holster. So until then, like I always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.